Hey guys, tonight we begin with the surprisingly mundane and monotonous existence of the humble donkey. These steadfast creatures who've plodded through history, carrying burdens both literal and metaphorical, while cartoons make them seem charming and witty. The reality is, being a donkey is utterly boring. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. By day 3 of your existence, something miraculous happens. Your legs, those 4 independently operated confusion sticks that have been operating under separate management, finally receive the memo that they're supposed to work together. It's like watching a committee reach consensus. Awkward, unlikely, but somehow functional. You wake up that morning with what passes for optimism in the donkey world, which is to say you're not actively expecting disaster. The sun filters through the barn door like buttery hope, and for a moment, just a moment, you feel like maybe today won't be a complete embarrassment to your species. Your first step is tentative. Your second step is slightly less tentative. By your third step, you're practically strutting, if strutting looked like a drunk person trying to navigate a funhouse. But you're moving forward, and forward is a direction you can work with. The pasture stretches before you like a green carpet someone forgot to vacuum. It looks peaceful from here, pastoral even. What you can't see from your limited vantage point is that this innocent-looking field is actually an elaborate obstacle course, designed by nature to humble young donkeys who are getting a little too confident about their motor skills. You take your first real venture into the great outdoors, and immediately discover that grass is not, in fact, a uniform surface. There are rocks hiding like landmines under the innocent green cover. There are holes that seem to appear exactly where you're about to place your hoof. There are mysterious dips and rises that make walking feel like trying to navigate a ship in rough seas. If ships were controlled by 4 uncoordinated legs and powered by stubborn determination. Other donkeys move through this landscape with the casual grace of dancers who've been practicing the same routine for years. They seem to glide rather than walk, their hooves finding purchase on surfaces that send you sliding like you're wearing ice skates on a marble floor. They pause to graze with the nonchalant confidence of creatures who've never questioned whether the ground will be there when they put their foot down. You, meanwhile, perfect, an entirely different art form. The dramatic stumble followed by the casual recovery. It becomes your signature move. Step, wobble, windmill your legs for balance, catch yourself at the last possible second, then pause and look around as if you meant to do that. As if that near-face plant was actually an elaborate donkey dance move that lesser creatures simply don't understand. The other donkeys watch these performances with what you choose to interpret as admiration, though it might also be concern, pity, or the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Your first encounter with modern technology comes in the form of the electric fence, that thin wire that looks so innocent, so harmless, so completely unthreatening. It's just sitting there, humming quietly to itself like a content bee. What could possibly go wrong? You approach with the confidence of someone who has never been personally betrayed by inanimate objects. The wire looks exactly like the kind of thing you might want to investigate with your nose, which is, after all, your primary tool for understanding the world. It seems reasonable, it seems safe. The shock hits you like a revelation wrapped in lightning. Your entire body experiences what can only be described as electric enlightenment, the sudden, undeniable understanding that not everything in the world is designed for your convenience. You leap backward with a grace you didn't know you possessed, landing in a dignified heap that somehow manages to look intentional. The fence continues its innocent humming, as if nothing has happened, as if it hasn't just introduced you to the concept that technology and donkeys have what might charitably be called a complicated relationship. From a safe distance, you regard the fence with new respect. This, you realize, is your introduction to the wider world's attitude toward boundaries, consequences, and the general principle that curiosity doesn't always lead to pleasant discoveries. The fence becomes your first philosophy teacher, offering lessons in cause and effect, action and reaction, and the fundamental truth that some things are better left uninvestigated. Chickens, as it turns out, are small, feathered embodiments of pure, concentrated unreasonableness. They move through the world with the confidence of creatures who have never doubted their right to exist exactly where they are, when they are, doing exactly what they're doing. They peck at things with the focused intensity of tiny archaeologists convinced that the next seed might hold the secrets of the universe. What they lack in size, they make up for in volume and attitude. Their conversations sound like heated debates, conducted in a language made entirely of complaints. They have opinions about everything: the weather, the quality of the scattered corn, your presence in their general vicinity, and they're not shy about sharing these opinions at considerable volume and length. Personal space, as a concept, is completely foreign to chickens. They operate under the apparent belief that the entire farm exists for their convenience, and that larger animals are simply mobile perches or sources of entertainment. They dart between your legs with the casual fearlessness of creatures who have never considered the possibility that they might be stepped on, or that stepping on them might be anything other than a minor inconvenience for everyone involved. You learn to move through their territory with the delicate precision of someone navigating a minefield populated by tiny, loud landmines that have opinions about your walking style. The farm dog presents an entirely different challenge. Where chickens are unreasonable, the dog is unreasonably friendly. He approaches your existence with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new form of entertainment that's been specifically designed for his amusement. He bounds toward you with a joy that seems disproportionate to the occasion, tail wagging like a flag in a windstorm, tongue lolling out in what you can only assume is an expression of pure delight at having found something new to be excited about. His eyes hold the bright madness of a creature who finds everything fascinating and most things hilarious. You, apparently, fall into the hilarious category. He doesn't seem to understand that you're a serious agricultural animal with important donkey business to attend to. Instead, he treats you like a large, walking toy that's been provided for his entertainment. He circles you with playful intensity, occasionally darting in to sniff at your legs, or attempt some form of interspecies communication that consists mainly of enthusiastic panting and the occasional encouraging bark. His boundary issues become apparent when he decides that your personal space is actually shared space, and that sharing space means he gets to be involved in everything you do. Eating? He's there, watching with interest. Walking? He's there, providing running commentary. Standing still and contemplating the meaning of grass? He's there. Apparently convinced that contemplation is a group activity, you begin to understand why the older donkeys have mastered the art of the withering stare. Rain, when it first arrives, feels like a personal attack from the sky. Each drop hits with the cold precision of tiny liquid accusations, as if the clouds have been watching your progress and found it wanting. The sky, apparently, has opinions about your performance so far, and those opinions are being expressed through the medium of organized wetness. Your first experience with rain is a masterclass in the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. You've seen other animals deal with weather; they seem to take it in stride, as if getting wet was just another part of existing in the world. What you didn't understand was that getting wet involves a specific kind of misery that can only be fully appreciated through direct experience. The water finds every gap in your not yet waterproof coat. It runs down your neck with the persistence of a small, cold stream that has decided to take up residence between your shoulders. Your ears fill with water that seems to echo with each step, creating a sloshing soundtrack to your misery. The ground, previously solid and reliable, becomes a slippery betrayal. Mud forms with the enthusiastic speed of something that has been waiting for exactly this opportunity to make your life more complicated. Each step becomes a negotiation between your desire to move forward and the mud's apparent desire to keep you exactly where you are. Other animals seem to handle this meteorological assault with varying degrees of acceptance. The chickens complain loudly, but continue their important pecking work. The older donkeys stand under whatever shelter they can find, wearing expressions of patient endurance that suggest they've been through this before and know it will pass. You, meanwhile, discover that being wet and cold is remarkably effective at making everything else seem less important. The grand adventures you were planning suddenly seem less appealing when viewed through a curtain of rain. The comfortable barn begins to look like the most desirable destination in the world. By the time the rain stops and the sun returns, you've learned something fundamental about existence. Weather happens to everyone, and there's a certain dignity in simply enduring it without making too much of a fuss. Though making a little bit of a fuss, you decide, is probably acceptable. The social dynamics of farm life reveal themselves slowly, like a complex dance you're learning by watching from the sidelines. There's a pecking order, and it's apparently both invisible and absolutely rigid. You spend your first weeks trying to figure out where you fit in this hierarchy, and gradually come to the unsettling realization that you're somewhere near the bottom of it, possibly underground. The older donkeys communicate in a sophisticated language of huffs, snorts, and meaningful glances that might as well be ancient Greek for all the sense it makes to you. They have conversations that consist entirely of ear positions and nostril flares, conveying complex information about who's allowed to eat where, when it's appropriate to move, and what everyone thinks about the current weather situation. You watch these exchanges with the intensity of an anthropologist studying a newly discovered culture. There are subtle hierarchies at work, unspoken agreements about territory and timing, complex protocols for everything from approaching the water trough to claiming the best shade spots during the heat of the day. Your attempts to participate in these social rituals are met with the kind of patient tolerance usually reserved for very small children who are trying to help with adult activities. The older donkeys acknowledge your presence with the gentle condescension of creatures who remember being young and foolish, but aren't particularly interested in reliving the experience. Your first attempt at braying that fundamental donkey skill that should, theoretically, come naturally, sounds like a rusty gate having an existential crisis. What should be a proud declaration of your donkeyhood comes out as a series of sounds that seem to surprise even you. It's part wheeze, part groan, and part question mark, as if your voice box isn't entirely sure what it's supposed to be doing. The other donkeys pause in whatever they're doing to listen to this acoustic catastrophe, their expressions suggesting they're trying to be polite about what is clearly a work in progress. Some tilt their heads, as if changing the angle might help them understand what you are attempting to communicate. Others simply return to their business with the diplomatic silence of creatures who understand that some things are better left uncommented upon. You practice in private after that, finding quiet corners of the pasture where you can work on your vocal technique without an audience. Progress is slow, and your early attempts sound like a mechanical problem looking for a solution. But gradually, very gradually, something resembling an actual bray begins to emerge from the chaos. The breakthrough comes when you discover that looking pathetic occasionally results in extra feed. It's not intentional at first, you're just naturally pathetic during your early weeks. A walking embodiment of confused vulnerability, but you notice that humans seem to respond to your more helpless moments with additional attention. And additional attention sometimes translates into additional food. You begin to refine this technique, developing what might generously be called strategic patheticness. A certain droop to the ears, a particular way of standing that suggests dejection, without crossing the line into actual drama. It's a delicate balance, too little, and nobody notices, too much, and you risk looking like you're performing rather than genuinely needy. The older donkeys watch these performances with what you choose to interpret as professional interest. They've clearly mastered this art form years ago, and your amateur attempts are probably providing them with entertainment value, if nothing else. Summer arrives like a personal challenge from the universe, bringing with it heat that seems designed specifically to make you question all of your life choices. The sun beats down with the relentless enthusiasm of something that has unlimited energy and no sense of moderation. The air shimmers with heat waves that make the distant parts of the pasture look like they're underwater. The flies, apparently, have been waiting all year for this moment. They descend upon the farm with the organizational efficiency of a small army that has been planning this invasion for months. They seem personally offended by your existence, taking your presence as a direct challenge to their right to exist in peace. These aren't casual, occasional flies. These are professional flies, dedicated flies, flies who have made bothering you their full-time occupation. They have a particular talent for finding the exact spots where you can't reach them, and they seem to enjoy the game of moving just out of range every time you try to address the situation. You develop a complex choreography of tail swishing, ear twitching, and strategic scratching against fence posts. The other animals have their own versions of this dance, creating a constant background rhythm of anti-fly activities that becomes the soundtrack to summer days. The heat makes everything slower, more deliberate. Even thinking seems to require more effort when the air itself feels like it's been heated in an oven. You learn to move from shade spot to shade spot like a traveler crossing a desert, timing your movements to minimize exposure to the sun's relentless attention. Water becomes the most important thing in the world. The water trough, previously just another piece of farm equipment, transforms into an oasis of possibility. You learn to appreciate not just drinking water, but standing near water, thinking about water, and the general concept of coolness in all its forms. During these long hot days, you begin to understand something fundamental about existence. Most of life involves managing discomfort with as much dignity as possible. The older animals have mastered this art, finding ways to stay cool, avoid the worst of the flies, and maintain their composure, even when the world feels like it's trying to cook them from the outside in. As summer stretches on, you experience a gradual realization that creeps up on you like dawn, slow, inevitable, and surprisingly peaceful. This is your life now. This pasture, these animals, these daily routines of eating and walking and avoiding flies and finding shade, this ordinary, unremarkable existence is actually your existence. At first, the thought seems almost disappointing. Surely life should involve more adventure, more excitement, more something. But as the days pass, you begin to understand that there's something to be said for knowing what to expect. There's a comfort in routine, a peace in predictability. The grass tastes the same every day, which turns out to be reassuring rather than boring. The morning sun hits the same spots at the same times, creating reliable patches of warmth when the nights have been cool. The other animals follow their own predictable patterns, creating a rhythm to the days that feels less like repetition and more like a gentle song. Your mother, meanwhile, has begun giving you what can only be described as the look, a particular expression that seems to say, "Figure it out yourself, Junior." It's not unkind, exactly, but it carries the clear message that the intensive mothering portion of your relationship is drawing to a close. She still keeps an eye on you, still steps in if there's actual danger, but the constant supervision has evolved into something more like benevolent oversight. You're expected to handle the basic challenges of daily life without requiring constant guidance and intervention. This transition feels both frightening and liberating. On one hand, you're still not entirely confident in your ability to navigate the world without backup. On the other hand, there's something appealing about the freedom to make your own mistakes without constant commentary from the management. You begin to take longer solo expeditions around the pasture, testing your independence in small, manageable doses. You discover that you have preferences about which areas you like best, which paths through the field feel most comfortable under your hooves, which spots offer the best combination of good grass and easy escape routes. As autumn approaches with its promise of cooler weather and different challenges, you find yourself settling into something that feels remarkably like contentment. The realization arrives quietly, without fanfare. Maybe being boring isn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe there's something to be said for a life that doesn't involve constant drama or excitement. Maybe there's value in knowing your role, understanding your environment, and finding satisfaction in simple competence. Maybe the goal isn't to be extraordinary, but to be reliably, comfortably ordinary. The other animals seem to have figured this out long ago. They go about their daily business with the quiet confidence of creatures who have made peace with their place in the world. They eat when they're hungry, rest when they're tired, seek shelter when it rains, and find shade when it's hot. They exist without apology or explanation, and there's something almost profound in their acceptance of the simple fact of their own existence. You're beginning to understand that this might be wisdom, the recognition that most of life is made up of ordinary moments, and that finding peace within those moments might be the closest thing to happiness that anyone really needs. The days are getting shorter now, and there's a different quality to the light that suggests change is coming. But change, you're learning, doesn't have to mean disruption. Sometimes, change is just the world's way of keeping things interesting, without making them complicated. As you stand in the cooling evening air, listening to the familiar sounds of the farm settling into another night, you feel something you haven't experienced before. A quiet satisfaction with exactly where you are and exactly who you're becoming. It turns out that growing up isn't just about learning to walk without falling down. It's about learning to fall down with style, and then getting back up with the kind of dignity that comes from understanding that everyone falls down sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. The boring life, it seems, might not be boring at all. It might just be honest. Independence, as it turns out, is less like spreading your wings and more like realizing you've been given a map to a place you're not entirely sure you want to visit. But curiosity, that persistent itch that seems hardwired into even the most sensible donkey brain, eventually wins out over comfort. Your first real adventure, beyond the immediate vicinity of food and safety, begins on a Tuesday morning that feels different from other Tuesday mornings, though you can't quite put your hoof on why. The air carries a hint of something possibility, maybe, or just the distant scent of different grass. The familiar boundaries of your small world suddenly seem less like safety barriers and more like suggestions. You've been eyeing the far corner of the pasture for weeks now, that mysterious region beyond the big oak tree where the fence curves out of sight and the world becomes theoretical rather than practical. Other animals venture there regularly, returning with the casual confidence of explorers who've seen distant lands and lived to tell about it. How hard could it be? The journey begins with the kind of careful planning that would make expedition leaders proud. You map out rest stops, identify potential sources of shade, and calculate the walking time based on your current level of physical fitness, which is somewhere between adequate and questionable. You're nothing if not thorough in your mediocrity. The first 100 yards pass without incident, which feels like a minor miracle. The grass here is the same grass you've been eating for months, but somehow it tastes different when consumed during an adventure. There's a hint of rebellion in every bite, a subtle flavor of independence that makes even ordinary clover seem exotic. By the halfway point, you're beginning to understand why other animals make this journey seem so casual. It's not particularly difficult, just long and slightly boring. The far corner of the pasture, which looked so mysterious from a distance, turns out to be remarkably similar to the near corner of the pasture, except farther away and requiring more walking to reach. But you press on, driven by the kind of stubborn determination that has probably gotten many donkeys into trouble throughout history. You're committed now, and there's something to be said for seeing things through, even when those things turn out to be less exciting than anticipated. The far corner, when you finally reach it, is fine. It's perfectly adequate. The grass is grass, the fence is fence, and the view is largely the same as the view from everywhere else, just facing a different direction. You stand there for a moment, taking in this new perspective on familiar territory, trying to feel the sense of accomplishment that should probably accompany such an expedition. What you feel instead is a vague sense of anticlimax, mixed with the dawning realization that you now have to walk all the way back. The return journey provides ample time for reflection on the nature of adventure and the relationship between effort and reward. You've expanded your world, technically speaking, but the expansion feels more lateral than transformational. It's like reading a very long book that turns out to have the same plot as a much shorter book you've already read. Still, there's something to be said for having done it. When you finally make it back to your usual grazing spot, the familiar grass tastes exactly like familiar grass. But now you have the knowledge that unfamiliar grass tastes basically the same. This feels like wisdom, even if it's the kind of wisdom that makes you question the value of seeking wisdom in the first place. Your first real escape attempt happens on a Thursday afternoon, when the gate latch fails to engage properly, and the world suddenly becomes much larger than it was 5 minutes ago. The gate swings open with a casual squeak, revealing the great unknown beyond the farm boundaries, the mysterious realm called the road, and whatever lies beyond it. For a moment, you stand there staring at this unexpected opportunity, trying to process the implications. Freedom beckons with all the appeal of something that seems like it should be appealing. Adventure awaits, assuming you're the kind of donkey who awaits adventure, which you're beginning to suspect you might not be. But the moment feels significant, like it deserves some kind of response. You can't just stand here looking at an open gate forever. That would be undignified. And you've worked hard to maintain what little dignity you've managed to accumulate. So you walk through it. The road is wider than it looked from the pasture, and significantly harder than grass. Your hooves make different sounds on the packed dirt and gravel, creating a percussion soundtrack to your impromptu expedition into the great beyond. The sounds echo strangely, as if the world outside the farm operates under different acoustic rules. The first few minutes feel genuinely liberating. You're a free donkey, unconstrained by fences or feeding schedules or the expectations of farm life. You can go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. The possibilities stretch out before you like the road itself, endless and full of potential. By minute 10, the novelty has begun to wear thin. Freedom, it turns out, comes with a surprising number of decisions. Which direction should you go? How fast should you walk? What should you do when you get wherever you're going? The pasture never required this many choices. By minute 20, you're beginning to understand why some animals choose security over freedom. There's something to be said for knowing where your next meal is coming from, and when it's scheduled to arrive, and whether it will be the kind of meal you actually want to eat. Minute 30 finds you standing in the middle of a road that looks exactly like the beginning of the road. Except now you're not entirely sure which direction leads back to the farm. The landscape has revealed itself to be surprisingly uniform, and your navigation skills, it turns out, are more theoretical than practical. By minute 37, homesickness hits like a revelation wrapped in regret. The farm suddenly seems like the most desirable place in the world, with its reliable fence lines and predictable routines and familiar animals who understand the proper protocols for sharing space and resources. You turn around with the decisive authority of someone who has seen enough of the world to know where they belong, and you walk back toward home with considerably more purpose than you walked away from it. The gate is still open when you return, as if it's been waiting patiently for you to finish your experiment with independence. You walk through it with the quiet satisfaction of someone returning from a successful mission, even though the mission turned out to be discovering that you prefer captivity to freedom. The familiar smells of the farm envelop you like a comfortable blanket that you forgot you were wearing until you took it off. The other animals look up from their various activities with expressions that seem to say, "How was your walk?" rather than, "Where have you been?" as if they always knew you'd be back. You settle into your usual spot by the water trough and try to process what you've learned from your brief taste of independence. The world beyond the farm exists, and it's probably perfectly fine, but it's also surprisingly similar to the world within the farm, except with more uncertainty and less reliable meal service. This, you realize, might be another piece of that mysterious thing called wisdom. Sometimes, the best adventures are the ones that help you appreciate what you already have. The grass really isn't greener anywhere else. It's just differently disappointing, and in ways that are less familiar and therefore less comfortable. Your own disappointments, at least, are disappointments you understand. Learning to read human moods becomes an essential skill when you realize that humans are basically large, unpredictable animals who control most of the important resources on the farm. They have moods the way weather has patterns, and understanding these patterns can mean the difference between extra treats and extra work. Stressed humans move differently than relaxed humans. They walk faster, gesture more sharply, and make sounds under their breath that suggest they're having conversations with invisible entities who are probably not being very helpful. Stressed humans are more likely to notice when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, and less likely to be amused by your mistakes. Tired humans, on the other hand, move like they're walking through invisible molasses. They pause more often, lean against things more frequently, and sometimes just stand there staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare of someone contemplating the fundamental absurdity of existence. Tired humans are less likely to notice minor infractions, but also less likely to provide extra attention or treats. Then there are the inexplicably cheerful humans, who seem to have discovered some secret source of energy and optimism that they're not sharing with anyone else. These humans whistle, hum, and sometimes even sing while they work. They're more likely to pause and scratch your ears for no apparent reason, but they're also more likely to have ambitious plans that involve you doing things you'd rather not do. You learn to adjust your behavior accordingly. Around stressed humans, you perfect the art of looking industrious without actually doing anything productive. Around tired humans, you practice being invisible until they've had their coffee and resumed normal human functioning. Around cheerful humans, you remain cautiously optimistic, while preparing for the possibility that their good mood might translate into extra work for everyone. The key, you discover, is reading the subtle signs. The speed of their walk, the set of their shoulders, the tone of their voice when they talk to other humans. Humans, for all their complexity, are surprisingly predictable once you learn their patterns. Gerald arrives on a Wednesday morning like a personal challenge from the universe, delivered in the form of a young donkey, who apparently missed the memo about appropriate levels of confidence for someone with zero life experience. He's roughly your age, roughly your size, and roughly 1,000% more sure of himself than anyone has any right to be. From the moment he steps off the trailer, Gerald carries himself with the kind of casual arrogance usually reserved for animals who have actually accomplished something significant in their lives. He surveys the farm with the critical eye of someone evaluating real estate, nodding approvingly at some features while clearly finding others beneath his standards. You watch this performance from a safe distance, trying to figure out what gives Gerald the impression that he's qualified to have opinions about a place he's been inhabiting for exactly 17 minutes. But there's something unsettling about his confidence, something that makes you question whether maybe you've been thinking too small about your own potential. The Cold War begins immediately, though neither of you officially declares it. It's more like a mutual recognition that the farm isn't big enough for two young donkeys with completely different philosophies about how young donkeys should conduct themselves in the world. Gerald believes in what might charitably be called aggressive self-advocacy. He approaches the water trough like he owns it, claims the best shade spots through sheer audacity, and somehow manages to be first in line for feeding time, despite having been on the farm for less time than it takes to properly digest a good meal. You, meanwhile, believe in the time-tested strategy of strategic patience, which is a polite way of saying you wait to see what happens before deciding what to do about it. This approach has served you well so far, but Gerald's presence seems to be challenging its effectiveness. The rivalry develops along predictable lines. Gerald gets the spot you were planning to occupy, so you find a different spot that's almost as good and pretend you prefer it. Gerald somehow manages to catch the attention of humans who seem charmed by his boldness, while you perfect the art of being reliably present without being demanding. It's not that you dislike Gerald exactly. It's more that his approach to life makes your approach look cautious by comparison, and you're not entirely sure how you feel about that comparison. Your first real fight happens on a Tuesday afternoon over a pile of particularly appealing hay that Gerald has decided belongs to him, despite having no legitimate claim to it beyond proximity and attitude. You've been watching this hay for several minutes, working up the courage to approach it, when Gerald simply walks over and starts eating. This seems like the kind of injustice that requires a response, though you're not entirely sure what kind of response is appropriate. You've never actually been in a fight before, unless you count that incident with the chicken, which was less a fight and more a mutual misunderstanding that ended with everyone involved feeling embarrassed. But this feels different. This feels like a moment that might define the kind of donkey you're going to be for the rest of your life. Are you the kind of donkey who lets other donkeys eat your hay? Or are you the kind of donkey who stands up for yourself, even when standing up for yourself might involve actual conflict? You approach Gerald with what you hope looks like confident determination, but probably looks more like nervous resolve. He glances up from the hay with the kind of mild interest usually reserved for weather phenomena that might or might not affect your immediate plans. "That's my hay," you say, or at least that's what you intend to convey through whatever combination of snorts and ear positions constitutes donkey for, "Excuse me, but I believe you're eating my lunch." Gerald's response is the donkey equivalent of a shrug, followed by another bite of hay that somehow manages to look more delicious when he's eating it than it did when you were just thinking about eating it. This escalates into what can only be described as the world's least dramatic confrontation. You position yourself strategically near the hay pile, trying to look imposing. Gerald continues eating with the casual indifference of someone who has never considered the possibility that anyone might challenge his right to eat whatever he wants whenever he wants to eat it. The actual physical conflict lasts approximately 47 seconds and consists mainly of awkward positioning, half-hearted shoving, and a lot of heavy breathing. Neither of you seems entirely sure how donkey fights are supposed to work, so you mostly improvise based on vague instincts and what you've observed from watching other animals settle disputes. It ends when both of you realize simultaneously that fighting is considerably more exhausting than either of you anticipated, and that the hay in question has stopped looking worth the effort. You separate by mutual consent, both pretending that the outcome was exactly what you intended, even though neither of you is entirely sure what the outcome actually was. Gerald goes back to eating hay, but from a different pile. You claim the original pile with the dignity of someone who has successfully defended their territory through force of arms, even though what actually happened was more like a draw settled by mutual exhaustion. The incident establishes a new equilibrium in your relationship. Gerald continues to be Gerald, but with a slightly increased awareness that his actions might have consequences. You continue to be you, but with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're willing to stand up for yourself when the situation requires it. It's not friendship, exactly, but it's a workable understanding between two young donkeys who are still figuring out how to exist in the same space without driving each other completely insane. The incident with the wheelbarrow happens on a Friday afternoon when curiosity finally overcomes common sense, and you decide to investigate the mysterious wheeled contraption that humans seem to find so useful for transporting things from one place to other places. What exactly happens with the wheelbarrow is the kind of story that becomes legend around the farm, though the details vary depending on who's telling it and how much time has passed since the actual event. The chickens claim it was a deliberate act of sabotage. The older donkeys suggest it was a learning experience that got slightly out of hand. The humans involved have what can only be described as a 1,000-yard stare whenever the topic comes up. What everyone agrees on is that wheelbarrows, as it turns out, are not designed to accommodate the investigative techniques of curious young donkeys, and that the laws of physics have very specific opinions about what happens when large animals interact with unstable wheeled objects in unpredictable ways. The aftermath involves cleanup, repair, and a new farm rule about which animals are allowed to interact with which pieces of equipment under which circumstances. You're not specifically banned from wheelbarrow proximity, but there's a general understanding that your relationship with wheeled transportation devices is probably best kept to a minimum. The incident becomes one of those stories that gets referred to in shorthand. Remember the wheelbarrow thing, followed by knowing nods and the kind of sighs that suggest some events are better left in the past where they belong. You develop a healthy respect for the complexity of human tools and the wisdom of leaving well enough alone when well enough involves anything with moving parts or wheels, or the potential for spectacular failure. Mastering the art of looking busy when humans approach with work in mind becomes an essential survival skill. Once you realize that humans have an unfortunate tendency to assume that animals who appear to be doing nothing are probably available for additional responsibilities. The key is to develop a repertoire of activities that look purposeful without actually being productive. Thoughtful grazing, for example, where you approach eating grass with the focused intensity of someone conducting important research into grass quality and optimal consumption techniques. Strategic wandering works well too, moving around the pasture with the deliberate pace of someone who has places to be and important animal business to conduct, even when your actual destination is just somewhere that isn't here, and your business consists mainly of avoiding whatever task the approaching human might have in mind. Looking busy while standing still requires more advanced techniques. This involves perfecting a contemplative expression that suggests you're engaged in complex donkey thoughts that shouldn't be interrupted by mundane concerns like manual labor. You gaze thoughtfully into the distance, as if you're solving important philosophical problems or planning strategic initiatives that require your full attention. The ultimate technique is the preemptive retreat, where you sense approaching humans with work intentions before they get close enough to make eye contact, and you casually relocate to a different area of the pasture, where you're technically available but practically inconvenient to recruit. These skills require practice and timing, but they're essential for maintaining the proper balance between being a helpful member of the farm community and being voluntarily enslaved by every human who happens to need an extra pair of hooves for whatever project they've decided needs immediate attention. Learning to open simple gate latches is one of those skills that seems like a good idea right up until the moment you actually acquire it, at which point it becomes clear that some knowledge comes with more responsibility than you bargained for. The first time you accidentally figure out how to work a gate latch, it feels like discovering fire or inventing the wheel. Here's this simple mechanism that has been keeping you contained, and it turns out to be surprisingly easy to manipulate once you understand the basic principles of leverage and timing. The sense of accomplishment lasts exactly until you realize that your newfound ability to open gates has fundamentally changed your relationship with boundaries. What used to be absolute barriers are now merely suggestions, and suggestions carry the burden of choice in ways that absolute barriers never did. Suddenly, every gate becomes a decision. Do you open it or don't you? If you open it, where do you go? If you don't open it, are you choosing containment or just being lazy? The simple certainty of being confined has been replaced by the complex uncertainty of being technically free, but practically constrained by the knowledge that freedom comes with consequences. The other animals watch your gate-opening experiments with varying degrees of interest and concern. Some seem impressed by your mechanical aptitude. Others appear to be calculating whether your new skill represents an opportunity or a threat to the established order of farm life. The humans, when they discover your talent, respond with the kind of creative problem-solving that suggests they've dealt with clever animals before. Latches become more complex, backup systems appear overnight, and suddenly your hard-won skill becomes the catalyst for an arms race between donkey ingenuity and human engineering. You begin to understand why some knowledge is considered dangerous, not because the knowledge itself is harmful, but because once you have it, you can't pretend you don't have it, and pretending you don't have it becomes its own kind of burden. Your first successful intimidation of a chicken happens on a Monday morning and becomes what you privately consider one of the defining moments of your early career as a farm animal. It's not a particularly large chicken, and the intimidation consists mainly of standing your ground when the chicken tries to claim a piece of ground you are already occupying, but it feels like a major diplomatic victory. The chicken in question, a particularly aggressive hen with strong opinions about personal space and resource allocation, has been testing your boundaries for weeks. She has a habit of darting between your legs during feeding time, claiming territory through sheer audacity, and generally behaving as if the farm exists for her convenience, and everyone else is just temporary staff. On this particular morning, she makes the tactical error of trying to claim the spot you're already standing in, apparently expecting you to move simply because she's arrived and decided she'd prefer to be where you are. It's the kind of assumption that has probably worked for her before, but today you're feeling less accommodating than usual. Instead of stepping aside, you plant your hooves and look down at her with what you hope is dignified firmness. You're not trying to be aggressive, exactly, just present, occupying your space with intention rather than apology. The chicken pauses, clearly recalculating her approach. This isn't how these interactions usually go. Usually, larger animals defer to her superior determination and tactical mobility. The concept of passive resistance seems to be new to her, and she's not entirely sure how to respond. After a moment of consideration, she chooses a different spot for whatever important chicken business she was planning to conduct. You remain where you are, trying not to let your satisfaction show too obviously. It's a small victory, but it feels significant. You've successfully asserted yourself without violence, drama, or the kind of scene that attracts unwanted attention from farm management. You've found the middle ground between being a pushover and being a bully, and that middle ground feels like a comfortable place to stand. The development of your signature move, the strategic sidestep, comes about through necessity rather than planning. When you're sharing space with animals who are faster, stronger, or more aggressive than you are, sometimes the best strategy isn't to stand and fight or turn and run, but to simply not be where the problem is expecting you to be. The strategic sidestep involves reading a situation quickly, identifying the most likely direction of incoming trouble, and moving just far enough to avoid the problem without appearing to retreat from it. It's less dramatic than fighting, less cowardly than running, and more dignified than standing there and hoping for the best. It works on chickens who are charging toward your position with territorial intentions. It works on other young animals who are feeling aggressive but not particularly focused. It even works on humans who are approaching with that purposeful stride that suggests they have plans for your immediate future that you might not enjoy. The key is timing and subtlety. Move too early, and you look paranoid. Move too late, and you're just getting out of the way after the fact. Move too far, and you look like you're retreating. Move too little, and you're still in the path of whatever you were trying to avoid. But when you get it right, the strategic sidestep creates a moment of confusion in your opponent that often resolves the situation without any further conflict. They arrive at the place where they expected to find you, discover that you're no longer there, and have to recalibrate their entire approach. By the time they've figured out where you've gone and what your new position means for their original plan, the moment has usually passed and everyone can move on to other things without anyone losing face. Discovering that you have opinions about things comes as something of a surprise, since you've spent most of your life so far just trying to figure out how to exist without causing too much trouble. But as you become more comfortable with the basic mechanics of daily life, you begin to notice that you actually have preferences about how things should be done. You have opinions about the optimal grass length for comfortable grazing. You have thoughts about the best times of day for various activities. You have definite feelings about which other animals you enjoy spending time with, and which ones you'd prefer to encounter less frequently. Most of your opinions, it turns out, are negative. This isn't because you're a pessimistic donkey by nature, but because negative opinions seem easier to identify than positive ones. It's easier to know what you don't like than to articulate what you do like, especially when what you do like is often just the absence of things you don't like. You don't like sudden loud noises. You don't like unexpected changes to your feeding schedule. You don't like when other animals invade your personal space without invitation. You don't like rain that lasts more than a few minutes. And you don't like sun that's hot enough to make shade feel like a precious commodity. Having opinions, you discover, is both liberating and exhausting. It's nice to know what you prefer, but it's also frustrating to realize how often your preferences conflict with reality. The world, it seems, was not designed with your personal comfort as its primary consideration, but there's something satisfying about having a point of view, even when that point of view is mostly complaints. It makes you feel like a more complete individual, like someone who exists in the world rather than just happening to be present in it. Your first full day without falling over anything is a milestone that passes almost unnoticed until evening, when you realize that you've successfully navigated an entire day without any significant coordination failures, no dramatic stumbles, no unexpected encounters with immovable objects, no moments where your legs forget they're supposed to work together. It's the kind of achievement that would be unremarkable for most animals, but feels revolutionary for someone whose early life was characterized by gravity-related mishaps and physics-defying recovery maneuvers. You mark the occasion by standing still and appreciating the simple pleasure of knowing where all four of your feet are and being confident they'll stay where you put them. It's a small thing, but small things sometimes feel large when you remember how recently they seemed impossible. Learning to read human body language becomes essential once you realize that humans communicate as much through posture and gesture as they do through those strange mouth sounds they're always making. Understanding the difference between come here and stay away can mean the difference between treats and trouble. Come here. Humans lean forward slightly, make gentle sounds, and extend their hands in ways that suggest offering rather than demanding. They move slowly and keep their voices soft, creating an atmosphere of invitation rather than command. Stay away. Humans stand straighter, move with sharp efficiency, and radiate the kind of focused energy that suggests they have important business to conduct that doesn't include socializing with farm animals. They might not be actively hostile, but they're clearly not in the mood for casual interaction. The subtle differences become easier to read with practice. The angle of shoulders, the speed of movement, the the tone of voice when they talk to other humans. All of these things provide information about whether this particular human, at this particular moment, is likely to be a source of positive attention or something to avoid until their mood improves. You develop a reputation for being good with people, which really just means you're good at reading when people want to be good with you and when they'd prefer you to be good somewhere else. The gradual accumulation of small victories and smaller defeats becomes the rhythm of daily life. As you settle into your role as a young adult donkey who's figured out most of the basics and is now working on the fine details. Small victories, successfully claiming the good shade spot before Gerald gets to it, opening a gate latch on the first try, avoiding the farm dog when he's in one of his overly enthusiastic moods, timing your approach to the water trough perfectly to avoid the evening rush. Smaller defeats, discovering that the good shade spot comes with aggressive flies, accidentally opening the wrong gate and having to face the consequences, missing the optimal timing for dinner and having to settle for second choice grass, getting caught in a brief shower because you misread the clouds. The victories and defeats balance out in ways that create a steady sense of progress without dramatic peaks or valleys. You're getting better at being a donkey, but slowly and with frequent reminders that competence is a work in progress rather than a final destination. Some days feel more successful than others, but even the less successful days rarely qualify as actual disasters. You've reached a level of basic competence that makes true catastrophe unlikely, while still leaving plenty of room for minor mistakes and learning opportunities. Autumn arrives like a gentle reminder that everything changes, even boring things. But that change doesn't have to mean disruption. The leaves shift from green to gold to brown, with the gradual inevitability of time passing, marking the seasons in ways that feel both predictable and magical. The air carries different smells now: wood smoke from distant chimneys, the sweet decay of fallen apples, the crisp promise of colder weather ahead. Your winter coat begins to grow with the automatic efficiency of a body that knows how to prepare for what's coming without being told. There's something satisfying about this seasonal transition, this reminder that you're part of larger cycles that have been repeating for longer than you've been alive and will continue repeating long after you're gone. It puts your daily concerns into perspective without making them feel insignificant. The other animals begin their own preparations for winter, the older donkeys growing thicker coats, the chickens molting and regrowing feathers, the humans stockpiling hay and making repairs to buildings that will need to withstand whatever weather the coming months might bring. You find yourself looking forward to winter, not because you expect it to be particularly enjoyable, but because you're curious to experience it as a competent animal, rather than as someone who's still figuring out the basics. This will be your first winter as someone who knows how to be a donkey, and there's something appealing about that prospect. As the days grow shorter and the nights grow cooler, you settle into the rhythms of your ordinary life with something that feels remarkably like contentment. You've found your place in the small world of the farm, and your place turns out to be exactly the right size for someone like you. You're not the most remarkable donkey who's ever lived, but you're a thoroughly competent donkey who knows how to navigate the basic challenges of donkey life with dignity and reasonable success. You've learned to stand your ground when necessary, yield gracefully when appropriate, and find satisfaction in the simple pleasure of being exactly who you are. The boring life, it turns out, is neither boring nor simple. It's just honest about what most of life actually consists of. Ordinary moments, small pleasures, minor challenges, and the quiet satisfaction of handling them all with reasonable grace. As autumn settles over the farm like a comfortable blanket that smells like wood smoke and possibility, you stand in your favorite spot by the water trough and watch the light change with the seasons. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and small adventures, but tonight you're exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And that, you realize, might be the most important thing you've learned so far. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones that lead you home to yourself. Territory, as it turns out, is less about conquest and more about knowing where you want to stand when the sun hits just right in the late afternoon. Your preferred corner of the pasture reveals itself gradually, the way important decisions often do, not through dramatic revelation, but through the slow accumulation of small preferences that eventually crystallize into something approaching certainty. The spot you eventually claim sits strategically positioned between the old oak tree and the fence line, close enough to the water trough for convenience, but far enough from the main thoroughfare to avoid the constant traffic of animals with places to be and things to do. It's near the good grass, the tender shoots that grow in the depression, where rainwater collects but not so close to Gerald's usual haunting grounds that every meal becomes a territorial negotiation. Gerald, for his part, has established himself in what he clearly considers the premium real estate, the slight hill that offers panoramic views of the entire pasture and the psychological advantage of looking down on everyone else. It's exactly the kind of location Gerald would choose, and exactly the kind of location you have no interest in defending. High ground requires vigilance, and vigilance is exhausting. Your corner requires no such maintenance. It's humble enough that no other animal feels compelled to challenge your claim to it, comfortable enough that you actually want to spend time there, and positioned perfectly for the kind of quiet observation that has become your preferred method of understanding the world. The process of claiming this space happens gradually, through nothing more dramatic than consistently choosing to be there. Day after day, you find yourself gravitating toward the same general area for your afternoon rest, your morning contemplation, your evening wind-down. Other animals begin to recognize this pattern, and through the mysterious diplomacy of farm life, an understanding emerges. This is your spot, and you are welcome to it. There's something deeply satisfying about having a place that's yours, not because you fought for it or inherited it or were assigned to it, but because you chose it, and it chose you back. It's a small sovereignty, but sovereignty nonetheless. The delicate art of donkey diplomacy reveals itself through daily practice as you learn to navigate the complex social ecosystem of the farm. Sharing, it turns out, is not simply a matter of generosity or selfishness, but a sophisticated negotiation involving timing, precedent, relative need, and the subtle calculus of social reciprocity. When the hay delivery arrives and creates temporary abundance, sharing becomes easy. There's enough for everyone, and generosity costs nothing. But when resources are scarce during the dry spell, when the grass stops growing, or when the water trough develops a leak and needs frequent refilling, every interaction becomes a diplomatic challenge. The art lies in knowing when to stand firm and when to yield gracefully. Stand firm too often, and you develop a reputation as difficult. Yield too frequently, and you become a pushover who gets taken advantage of by every animal with more attitude than consideration. The sweet spot exists somewhere in the middle, in that delicate balance between reasonable accommodation and principled resistance. You learn to read the subtle signs that indicate when another animal's need is genuine versus when they're simply testing your boundaries. The older donkey who approaches your water spot with the slow, careful movements of someone genuinely thirsty deserves different consideration than the young goat who bounds over with the aggressive enthusiasm of someone who wants your water simply because you have it. Context matters enormously. The same resource-sharing request that would be reasonable on a cool morning becomes unreasonable during the heat of midday, when shade is precious and everyone's patience runs thin. The timing of requests, the manner in which they're made, the history of previous interactions, all of these factors influence the appropriate response. Your first successful intimidation of a larger animal happens on a Tuesday morning, when the goat, a creature roughly your size, but with significantly more attitude, decides to test your commitment to your breakfast. The goat has been watching you eat with the calculating interest of someone conducting market research on potential takeover opportunities. When she finally makes her move, approaching your hay pile with the casual confidence of someone who assumes ownership transfers automatically to whoever wants something more than the current owner does, you surprise both of you by not stepping aside. The intimidation, when it happens, consists mainly of not moving. You continue eating with deliberate calm, while positioning yourself in a way that makes it clear you're aware of her presence and prepared to defend your position if necessary. It's not aggressive exactly, but it's unmistakably firm. The goat pauses, clearly recalculating her approach. This isn't how these interactions usually proceed. Normally, a combination of size, confidence, and strategic positioning would be enough to convince smaller animals to relocate voluntarily. Your refusal to cooperate with this program requires her to consider alternative strategies. After a moment of consideration, she chooses a different hay pile, but not before giving you a look that suggests she's filed this interaction away for future reference. You've passed some kind of test, earned some measure of respect, or at least established that you're not automatically available for resource redistribution. It doesn't count as much of a victory, she's not significantly larger than you. And goats are generally more interested in causing mild chaos than winning serious conflicts, but it feels like progress. You've successfully defended a position through nothing more than calm determination, and that feels like a skill worth developing. Learning that territory is less about land and more about where you feel like standing proves to be one of those revelations that seems obvious in retrospect, but takes actual experience to understand. Physical boundaries are important, but psychological boundaries matter more. Your corner of the pasture is yours not because you've marked it with scent or defended it through combat, but because you've consistently chosen to be there and others have consistently chosen to respect that choice. It's a collective agreement based on mutual convenience, rather than a property deed enforced through violence. But this principle extends beyond physical space, to include temporal territory, your preferred times, for various activities, and social territory, your role in the complex hierarchy of farm relationships. These boundaries are invisible, but no less real than fence lines, and they require the same kind of ongoing maintenance and occasional defense. The most important territory you claim is the space around your own preferences and limitations. You establish that you're the kind of donkey who prefers morning grazing to evening grazing, who likes to drink water before eating rather than after, who needs a few minutes of standing still before transitioning between activities. These might seem like minor quirks, but establishing them as legitimate parts of your identity requires a certain amount of gentle insistence. The world is full of other animals with different preferences who assume their way of doing things is the only reasonable way of doing things, and accommodating everyone else's preferences while ignoring your own is a recipe for becoming invisible in your own life. Your introduction to actual work comes with the shocking revelation that humans have been watching your development with something approaching professional interest, and they've concluded that you're ready to contribute to the farm's productivity in ways that go beyond simply existing and eating grass. The work, when it materializes, is exactly as advertised, carrying things from one place to another place. This sounds simple enough in theory, but in practice, it involves a complex array of skills you've never had to develop simultaneously. Understanding human instructions, coordinating your movement with their expectations, and learning to carry loads that affect your balance and mobility. Your first assignment involves transporting a small cart full of tools from the barn to the far pasture where the humans are repairing a section of fence. The cart itself is not particularly heavy, but it's attached to you in a way that makes every movement feel slightly unnatural, and the tools inside it shift and rattle with each step, creating a percussion soundtrack to your journey. The humans walk alongside you with the patient encouragement of teachers working with a promising but inexperienced student. They make sounds that seem designed to be supportive, though the specific meaning of these sounds remains largely mysterious. The tone suggests approval when you move in the right direction, and gentle correction when you don't. The shocking discovery that humans expect consistency and effort reveals itself gradually, as you realize that this work arrangement is not a one-time experiment, but an ongoing expectation. They want you to be reliable, to show up when scheduled, to maintain a steady pace, to complete tasks with the same level of competence every time. This is a fundamentally different relationship than the casual coexistence you've enjoyed up to this point. Before, your value to the farm was largely theoretical. You existed. You converted grass into fertilizer. You added to the general atmosphere of agricultural authenticity. Now, your value is practical, measurable, tied to specific outputs and performance standards. The pressure is not overwhelming, but it's definitely present. Humans, you discover, have surprisingly long memories for disappointing performances and frustratingly high standards for what constitutes adequate effort. They seem to believe that because you demonstrated competence once, you should be able to demonstrate it consistently, which reveals a touching faith in the reliability of donkey motivation that may not be entirely justified. Mastering the balance between helpful enough and not too helpful becomes a crucial skill once you realize that humans have a complicated relationship with animal assistance. They want your help, but they want it delivered in specific ways, at specific times, and with specific limitations that they don't always communicate clearly in advance. Too little help, and you develop a reputation as lazy or uncooperative. Too much help, and you become inconvenient, interfering with human activities, complicating simple tasks, or demonstrating initiative in areas where initiative is not welcome. The sweet spot involves understanding what humans actually want versus what they say they want, and calibrating your response accordingly. When they ask you to carry something, they want you to carry it efficiently and without drama. When they ask you to wait, they want you to wait patiently without requiring constant reassurance. When they don't ask you to do anything, they generally prefer that you find something useful to do that doesn't require their supervision or intervention. Reading human expectations requires the same kind of attention to subtle cues that you've developed for reading other animals. But humans are more complex and less consistent. Their moods affect their expectations. Their stress levels influence their patience, and their own competence at various tasks determines how much assistance they actually want versus how much they think they want. The ongoing negotiation between your preferences and everyone else's expectations becomes a daily exercise in diplomatic compromise. You learn to accommodate reasonable requests while maintaining reasonable boundaries, to be helpful without being self-sacrificing, and to assert your own needs without being demanding. Some days the negotiation goes smoothly, with everyone's needs aligning in ways that make cooperation feel natural and mutually beneficial. Other days feel like a complex dance where everyone is trying to lead, and no one is quite sure what music they're dancing to. The arrival of new animals to the farm brings with it the unexpected realization that you've somehow become one of the experienced ones, a development that feels both flattering and slightly terrifying. New animals look at you with the same mixture of curiosity and deference that you once directed toward the older, more established residents. Your first real test in this new role comes when a young sheep arrives with questions about everything, from water trough etiquette to the optimal timing for various daily activities. She approaches you with the assumption that because you've been here longer, you therefore know things worth knowing, and she's not entirely wrong. You find yourself dispensing advice about which humans are approachable when, how to avoid the more aggressive chickens, and the unspoken protocols that govern shared spaces and resources. It's strange to hear yourself speaking with the voice of experience, offering guidance based on lessons you learned through trial and error not so very long ago. The responsibility feels both natural and artificial. Natural because you do, in fact, know things that newcomers don't know, and sharing that knowledge seems like the reasonable thing to do. Artificial because you're still learning most things yourself, and the gap between your knowledge and ignorance is much smaller than your new role suggests. Learning to communicate displeasure without actually being unpleasant proves to be an essential skill for maintaining relationships while protecting your own interests. There are times when other animals do things that affect you negatively, and pretending everything is fine leads to resentment, but expressing displeasure too directly can escalate minor issues into major conflicts. The art lies in developing a vocabulary of subtle signals that convey your position without creating drama. A certain way of positioning your ears that suggests mild irritation without open hostility. A particular pace of movement that indicates you're not entirely pleased with current circumstances without making a scene about it. Body language becomes crucial. The angle of your head can communicate everything from polite interest to barely concealed exasperation. The timing of your movements can suggest cooperation or reluctant compliance. The duration of your glances can indicate anything from casual acknowledgement to pointed commentary on someone's behavior. Your first real friendship with Beatrice, the pragmatic mare who shares your worldview, develops gradually through a series of parallel experiences and mutual recognition of shared values. Beatrice arrives on a Wednesday afternoon with the calm confidence of someone who has seen enough of the world to have realistic expectations about it. Unlike Gerald's aggressive self-assurance or the new sheep's anxious enthusiasm, Beatrice carries herself with the quiet competence of someone who knows what she's doing and doesn't feel compelled to prove it to anyone. She assesses the farm's social dynamics with the detached interest of an anthropologist, finds herself a suitable place in the established order, and settles in without disrupting anyone else's routine. Your friendship begins through proximity and shared silence. You find yourselves occupying adjacent spaces during rest periods, not because either of you seeks out the other's company, but because you both prefer the same kind of quiet locations that offer good observation points without requiring social interaction. The shared silence becomes comfortable rather than awkward, and comfortable silence is the foundation of the best friendships. You discover that Beatrice shares your appreciation for watching other animals navigate their daily dramas, without feeling compelled to participate in those dramas yourself. Your conversations, when they develop, consist largely of brief exchanges about practical matters, observations about weather patterns, assessments of grass quality in different areas of the pasture, and the occasional wry comment about the behavioral quirks of other farm residents. Beatrice has mastered the art of being simultaneously engaged with and detached from the social complexities of farm life. She participates when participation serves her interests, observes when observation is more useful, and maintains a level of emotional equilibrium that you find both admirable and restful. The slow realization that you've developed something resembling wisdom sneaks up on you like dawn, so gradual you don't notice it happening until it's clearly already happened. The wisdom consists not of knowing dramatic truths about the meaning of existence, but of understanding practical things about how to live comfortably within your circumstances. You know which humans are reliable, and which ones have moods that make them unpredictable. You understand the seasonal rhythms that affect everything from grass growth to animal behavior. You've learned to read the subtle signs that indicate changes in weather, social dynamics, or resource availability. More importantly, you've developed judgment about when to act and when to wait, when to assert yourself and when to accommodate others, when to take risks and when to choose safety. This judgment doesn't come from following rules, but from accumulating experience and learning to trust your own assessment of situations. The wisdom feels both substantial and modest. Substantial, because it represents real knowledge gained through real experience. Modest, because it's mostly about managing ordinary challenges rather than solving cosmic mysteries. But ordinary challenges, you've discovered, make up the vast majority of life, and managing them well is perhaps the most practical form of wisdom available. Winter arrives with the subtle drama of a season that knows how to make an entrance without making a scene. The cold comes gradually, giving everyone time to adjust, but it comes thoroughly, settling into the bones of the world with the patient persistence of something that plans to stay for a while. Your first adult winter teaches you things about comfort that you never had to consider during the warmer months. The simple pleasure of dry shelter becomes profound when the alternative is standing in cold rain that seems designed specifically to find every gap in your winter coat. The barn transforms from merely convenient to genuinely precious, a warm sanctuary that smells like hay and safety. The cold makes everything more deliberate. Movements that felt casual during summer require planning and consideration when every step involves negotiating mud, ice, or snow. Water that was previously taken for granted becomes something to be savored when drinking, involves breaking through thin ice or waiting for humans to deliver unfrozen supplies. But there's something deeply satisfying about successfully navigating winter's challenges. Each morning that you wake up warm and fed feels like a small victory against the elements. The farm's winter routines create a sense of shared purpose among all the animals, everyone working together to stay comfortable and well fed until spring returns. The rhythm of winter days develops its own appeal. Shorter periods of activity punctuated by longer periods of rest. More time spent in comfortable proximity to other animals, sharing warmth and companionship. The luxury of standing still and watching snow fall without feeling like you should be doing something more productive. Spring arrives like a letter from a friend you'd almost forgotten, full of reminders about pleasures you haven't experienced in months. The return of green grass after a winter of hay feels like rediscovering a favorite food you'd forgotten how much you enjoyed. The air carries different smells, earth warming in the sun, water moving freely again, plants beginning their annual project of turning sunlight into food. Mud season, that inevitable transition between winter's ice and spring's growth, tests everyone's patience with its own particular challenges. The ground becomes unreliable, shifting between solid and liquid in ways that make every step an adventure in terrain navigation. Walking becomes less like transportation and more like a form of environmental puzzle solving. But mud season also brings with it a sense of anticipation that makes the inconvenience tolerable. This is temporary discomfort in service of permanent improvement. The world is literally becoming more fertile under your feet, and the evidence of that fertility squishes between your hooves with every step. The optimism of spring affects even the most pragmatic animals. There's something contagious about the season's energy, its confident assumption that growth and renewal are not only possible but inevitable. The returning birds carry news from other places. The warming sun makes everything feel possible, and the lengthening days provide more time for whatever projects spring might inspire. Your daily routine crystallizes during this period into something approaching contentment, not the dramatic happiness of constant excitement, but the steady satisfaction of knowing what to expect and finding it generally agreeable. Morning grazing in the spot where the sun hits first, midday rest in the shade of the oak tree, afternoon work if work is required, evening socializing near the water trough, nighttime rest in the barn, where the sounds of other animals create a gentle background rhythm. The routine provides structure without feeling restrictive, predictability without becoming boring. Each day offers variations on familiar themes, rather than completely new challenges, and the variations are usually small enough to handle without major stress or adjustment. There's something deeply peaceful about this level of life mastery, knowing your environment well enough to navigate it easily, understanding your role clearly enough to fulfill it competently, and being comfortable enough with yourself to enjoy the simple pleasure of existing without constantly striving for something different or better. The discovery that boredom and peace might be the same thing comes as one of those revelations that seems obvious only after you've experienced it directly. What you once thought of as boredom, the absence of excitement, drama, or significant change, reveals itself to be actually a form of contentment so complete that it doesn't require external stimulation to sustain itself. The realization arrives during a particularly unremarkable afternoon, when you're standing in your usual spot, watching clouds move across the sky with the kind of attention usually reserved for more obviously interesting phenomena. You're not waiting for anything to happen, not wishing you were somewhere else, not feeling like you should be doing something different. You're simply present in the moment, and the moment is sufficient. This, you understand, is what peace feels like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of sufficient resources, both internal and external, to handle whatever problems might arise. Not the excitement of constant stimulation, but the deep satisfaction of being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you're suited to do. The arrival of Dolores changes everything in ways that are both dramatic and subtle, like watching a familiar landscape transform under different lighting. She appears on a Thursday morning that started like any other Thursday morning, but quickly reveals itself to be the kind of Thursday that divides your life into before and after. Dolores steps off the trailer with the unconscious grace of someone who has never questioned her right to exist exactly as she is, in whatever space she happens to occupy. She's not aggressively confident like Gerald, or strategically competent like Beatrice. She simply is, with the kind of natural presence that makes everyone else suddenly aware of their own self-consciousness. She smells like wildflowers and possibility, though the wildflowers might be actual wildflowers from wherever she lived before, and the possibility might be your imagination working overtime to process this unexpected development in your otherwise predictable existence. Your first attempt at donkey courtship reveals itself to be a masterclass in the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application. You've observed other animals engaging in romantic behaviors, and the basic principles seem straightforward enough. Demonstrate your positive qualities, show interest without being overwhelming, and hope for reciprocation. In practice, courtship turns out to involve a complex choreography of approach and retreat, communication and interpretation, timing and intuition that makes your previous social challenges seem like simple arithmetic compared to advanced calculus. Your initial strategy involves what might generously be called strategic proximity, positioning yourself in locations where Dolores is likely to be, without making it obvious that you're positioning yourself anywhere for any particular reason. This requires a level of casual deception that doesn't come naturally to someone whose approach to life has generally favored straightforward honesty. The strategy proves partially successful, in that you do, in fact, end up spending more time in Dolores's general vicinity. But proximity without interaction is just geography, and geography alone has never led to meaningful relationships. Your first actual conversation attempt involves commenting on the weather, which seems like safe common ground until you realize that commenting on weather requires having something interesting to say about weather, and your weather-related observations tend toward the obvious. It's sunny today, or those clouds look like they might contain rain. Dolores receives these meteorological insights with polite attention that could indicate either genuine interest or well-mannered tolerance. The ambiguity is maddening, but ambiguity, you're learning, is a fundamental feature of romantic interaction rather than a temporary obstacle to be overcome. Learning that love is mostly about finding someone who tolerates your quirks proves to be both reassuring and slightly disappointing. The reassuring part is that you don't have to become a completely different donkey to be worthy of affection. The disappointing part is that love turns out to be more practical and less transformative than the dramatic stories might suggest. Dolores tolerates your tendency to overthink simple decisions, your preference for eating grass in a specific sequence based on factors that make sense to you but probably seem arbitrary to outside observers, and your habit of standing very still for long periods while you think about things that may or may not be worth thinking about. In return, you learn to tolerate her morning energy that peaks before you're fully awake, her social confidence that sometimes attracts more attention than you're comfortable sharing, and her occasional suggestions for activities that sound like more work than fun. The tolerance develops into something warmer and more substantial as you discover that your quirks and her quirks somehow fit together in ways that create a combined personality that's more comfortable than either of your individual personalities alone. The quiet satisfaction of shared silence on warm afternoons becomes the foundation of your relationship with Dolores. Unlike the charged silence of early courtship, where every moment of non-conversation felt like a missed opportunity for meaningful exchange, comfortable silence requires no explanation or justification. You can stand together in the shade of the oak tree, watching the play of light and shadow on the grass, listening to the background sounds of farm life, thinking your separate thoughts without feeling obligated to share them or make them interesting for someone else's consumption. This shared silence feels like an achievement, a form of intimacy that requires more trust than conversation, because it assumes that your simple presence is sufficient entertainment and companionship for someone else. You don't have to perform or explain or justify your existence. You can simply exist alongside someone who also exists, and the combination creates something that feels larger and more stable than either of you alone. The warm afternoons stretch out like promises of time that belongs to no one but you and Dolores. Time that doesn't need to be productive or educational or meaningful in any way beyond the simple pleasure of experiencing it together. As your first year of true adulthood draws to a close, you find yourself settling into patterns that feel both established and still developing. You've claimed your space, found your role, developed your skills, and begun to understand the difference between being adequate and being competent. The competence feels good, but not dramatically good. It's the steady satisfaction of knowing that you can handle whatever ordinary challenges might arise, that you've developed enough judgment to make reasonable decisions about matters within your control, and that you've found ways to be useful without being indispensable, valued without being irreplaceable. Your peak performance, as it turns out, is still pretty average, but pretty average feels like exactly the right level of achievement for someone whose goals have evolved from figure out how to exist comfortably and contribute meaningfully to the small world you inhabit. The boring life continues to reveal itself as neither boring nor simple, but as a complex and satisfying engagement with the ordinary challenges of ordinary existence. You've learned that dramatic achievements are less important than consistent competence, that exciting experiences are less valuable than reliable contentment, and that being extraordinary is less appealing than being thoroughly, completely yourself. As winter approaches again, bringing with it the familiar cycle of seasonal changes and challenges, you stand in your claimed corner of the pasture next to Dolores, watching the light change with the shortening days, and you feel something that can only be described as profound ordinariness. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're suited to do, with exactly the right companion for the life you've chosen to live. And if that's not extraordinary, it's certainly extraordinary enough. Routine, it turns out, is not the enemy of satisfaction, but its most reliable provider. Your life settles into patterns that are predictable in the way sunrise is predictable. Not boring because you know it's coming, but comforting because you can count on it happening exactly when and how you need it to happen. The morning circuit develops organically over months of trial and error, like a path worn by countless feet until it becomes the obvious way to travel through familiar territory. First stop, the water trough. Not necessarily because you're desperately thirsty, but because checking the water situation provides essential intelligence about the day ahead. Low water suggests the humans are running behind schedule, which affects meal timing and general farm efficiency. Full, clean water indicates that the morning routine is proceeding according to plan. Next comes the food assessment, not just looking at what's available, but evaluating quality, quantity, and distribution patterns. Are you dealing with the good hay that was stored properly and smells like summer afternoons, or the adequate hay that will sustain life without providing much joy in the process? Has the grain been distributed fairly, or do you need to engage in gentle political maneuvering to ensure your fair share? The weather assessment requires reading multiple information sources simultaneously. The sky, obviously, but also the behavior of birds, the feel of the wind, the way moisture sits in the air. Your weather predictions have become surprisingly accurate, not through mystical intuition, but through years of paying attention to patterns and correlations that city animals never learn to recognize. The animal judgment portion of your morning circuit involves observing who's where, doing what, and with what apparent level of competence or confusion. Are the chickens displaying their normal level of organized chaos, or is there some disruption in their social order that might affect everyone else's day? Is Gerald positioning himself for another one of his territorial power plays, or has he settled into one of his rare periods of reasonable behavior? This circuit takes approximately 17 minutes when executed at optimal efficiency, longer if you encounter situations that require diplomatic intervention, or shorter if weather conditions make extended observation uncomfortable. But the circuit itself never varies, because variation introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is the enemy of the kind of deep contentment you've worked years to achieve. Your reputation as the reasonable donkey develops gradually, built on countless small interactions where you demonstrate the kind of judgment that humans and animals alike find both reliable and convenient. Reasonable donkeys don't create drama where none is needed, don't escalate minor conflicts into major ones, and can be trusted to make sensible decisions about matters that don't require expert consultation. Being reasonable is not the same as being passive. It means understanding the difference between issues worth fighting about and issues that will resolve themselves if given adequate time and space. It means knowing when to intervene in conflicts between younger animals and when to let them work things out independently. It means recognizing which human requests are genuine necessities and which are convenience-based suggestions that can be negotiated. The reasonable donkey reputation comes with both privileges and responsibilities. Humans consult you about animal-related decisions, not through formal conversation, but through that peculiar human habit of talking to animals while actually talking to themselves. Should we separate these two until they calm down? They'll ask while looking at you, and your body language becomes part of their decision-making process. Other animals seek your opinion about territorial disputes, resource allocation, and the general interpretation of human behavior. You become a kind of informal arbitrator, not because you've sought the role, but because your track record of sensible responses has created demand for your judgment. The gradual accumulation of small responsibilities you never asked for arrives like everything else in adult life, slowly, then all at once. One day, you're just another animal going about your business. And the next day, you're somehow responsible for training newcomers, mediating disputes, and serving as the default decision maker when humans aren't available to make decisions themselves. These responsibilities accumulate without fanfare or formal recognition. There's no ceremony where you're appointed to the position of senior donkey in charge of reasonable decisions. Instead, you simply wake up one morning to discover that everyone expects you to know things, and they're not wrong about the knowing things part, but nobody asked whether you wanted to be the repository of farm-related knowledge. The teaching component proves particularly time-consuming. Young animals arrive with the confident ignorance of creatures who assume that enthusiasm can substitute for experience, and someone has to explain why certain approaches to farm life lead to disappointment, while others lead to comfortable routine. Usually, that someone turns out to be you. New animals who think they know better present a particular challenge that requires the diplomatic skills of a career negotiator, combined with the patience of a philosophy professor. They arrive with ideas about how things should be done based on their experiences in other places, and they're often sincerely convinced that their methods represent improvements over the established systems. Take the young horse who arrives convinced that morning grazing should begin at dawn, because that's when the grass has the most nutritional value. He's not wrong about the nutritional science, but he's completely wrong about the practical politics of farm life. Dawn grazing requires negotiating for space with animals who have been using the prime locations for years, and disrupting established patterns creates stress that outweighs any nutritional benefits. Explaining this requires the kind of patient education that acknowledges the logical foundation of his approach while introducing him to the complex realities that make simple solutions insufficient. You can't just say that won't work without explaining why, because young animals with ideas deserve better than arbitrary dismissal. But you also can't spend your entire morning providing graduate-level courses in farm sociology every time someone shows up with enthusiasm and theories. The weather's refusal to cooperate with your preferences becomes a persistent source of minor irritation that requires ongoing philosophical adjustment. You've reached an age where you know exactly how you prefer each day to unfold, and weather that interferes with those preferences feels like a personal affront from a universe that should know better by now. Rain that arrives during optimal grazing time forces uncomfortable choices between staying dry and maintaining nutritional schedules. Wind that makes standing in your preferred location unpleasant requires either tolerance of discomfort or adjustment of carefully calibrated routines. Heat that exceeds reasonable parameters demands energy-consuming adaptations to schedules that were designed around more moderate temperatures. The philosophical challenge involves accepting that weather operates according to systems far larger and more complex than your personal convenience, while still maintaining the right to have opinions about weather that fails to meet your reasonable expectations for environmental cooperation. You develop increasingly sophisticated methods for working around weather-related obstacles, but the need to develop these methods at all feels like an ongoing negotiation with forces that should be more accommodating after all these years of coexistence. Humans who have ideas about improvement and efficiency represent a special category of management challenge that requires the diplomatic skills of someone managing a boss who's enthusiastic about implementing solutions to problems that don't actually exist. The efficiency experts usually arrive with charts, measuring devices, and the kind of confident energy that suggests they've discovered revolutionary approaches to problems that have been solved adequately for years. They want to optimize feeding schedules, reorganize traffic patterns, and implement systems that will make everything run more smoothly. The improvements typically involve changes to routines that work perfectly well in their current form, based on theories about how animal behavior should function, rather than observations about how it actually functions in this specific environment with these particular animals. Your role in these situations involves demonstrating through quiet resistance that some improvements are actually solutions in search of problems, while remaining cooperative enough to avoid being labeled as resistant to change. This requires a careful balance between passive compliance and active sabotage, where you follow new procedures just ineffectively enough to illustrate their practical limitations without appearing deliberately obstructive. The ongoing project of teaching younger animals how not to be completely useless becomes a major component of your daily routine, as you realize that competence is not automatically transmitted through observation and good intentions. Young animals arrive with the natural confidence of creatures who have never failed at anything important, because they've never attempted anything important enough to fail at. They approach complex challenges with simple solutions, assume that effort can substitute for experience, and require gentle correction before their enthusiasm leads them into situations that create problems for everyone. Teaching involves more than explaining correct procedures. It requires demonstrating why correct procedures exist, what happens when they're ignored, and how to develop the judgment necessary to know when rules can be bent and when they must be followed exactly. The most challenging students are the ones who learn quickly enough to become overconfident before they've developed the wisdom to recognize the limits of their knowledge. They master basic skills and immediately assume they're ready for advanced challenges, requiring the kind of diplomatic intervention that acknowledges their progress, while preventing premature graduation to responsibilities they're not ready to handle. You've mastered the art of being exactly where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, doing exactly what the situation requires, without drama, delay, or unnecessary complications. This sounds like a simple achievement, but it represents the culmination of years of learning to read environments, anticipate needs, and coordinate your actions with the complex systems of farm life. Being exactly where you're supposed to be requires understanding not just your own needs and preferences, but how those needs and preferences fit into the larger patterns of daily life. It means timing your movements to avoid congestion at popular locations, positioning yourself to be available when help is needed without being intrusive when privacy is preferred, and maintaining your own routines without disrupting anyone else's. Your opinions are sought occasionally and respected sometimes, which represents exactly the right level of influence for someone who prefers advisory roles to executive responsibilities. Humans consult you about animal-related decisions through their habit of thinking out loud in your presence. Other animals seek your perspective on territorial disputes and resource allocation conflicts. The occasionally and sometimes qualifiers are important because they prevent your advisory role from becoming a full-time occupation. You're available for consultation when consultation is needed, but you're not expected to have opinions about everything or to solve problems that other animals should solve for themselves. Your signature look develops organically over years of responding to daily situations that require more emotional nuance than simple approval or disapproval. The look that emerges conveys mild disapproval without unkindness, the expression of someone who has seen this particular variety of foolishness before and expects better, but who understands that learning is a process, and mistakes are part of that process. The look serves multiple functions. It communicates displeasure without escalating conflicts, expresses expectations without being demanding, and provides feedback without requiring verbal explanation. It's particularly effective with young animals who need guidance about social boundaries and behavioral expectations. Perfecting this expression requires understanding the fine line between helpful correction and judgmental criticism. Too much disapproval, and you become intimidating. Too little, and your feedback loses effectiveness. The optimal expression suggests disappointment rather than anger, expectation rather than demand. Your daily routine achieves the status of local tradition as other animals begin to organize their own activities around the predictable patterns of your schedule. They know when you'll be at the water trough, when you'll claim your preferred grazing spot, and when you'll begin your evening circuit of the farm perimeter. This creates a kind of informal timekeeping system where your activities serve as reference points for community scheduling. Morning activities begin when you complete your assessment circuit. Midday rest periods align with your movement to the shaded areas. Evening social time starts when you position yourself near the water trough for final daily observations. The tradition status means that changes to your routine require diplomatic consultation with other animals whose schedules have become dependent on yours. You can't simply decide to start your morning circuit 30 minutes earlier without creating ripple effects throughout the farm's social ecosystem. Your partnership with Dolores evolves into comfortable coexistence, not the passionate romance of early courtship, but the deeper satisfaction of two individuals who have learned to inhabit the same space without constant negotiation or drama. Comfortable coexistence means understanding each other's rhythms, preferences, and quirks well enough to coordinate daily life without friction. Dolores knows that you prefer morning activities and evening reflection, while you've learned to accommodate her peak energy periods and social needs. The evolution involves letting go of the expectation that love means constant togetherness or shared enthusiasm for the same activities. Instead, it means creating parallel routines that intersect at optimal points while allowing individual space for personal pursuits and preferences. You discover that the most romantic moments are often the most ordinary ones, standing together in comfortable silence while rain falls on the barn roof, sharing the good grass without competition or negotiation, sleeping near each other with the quiet security of permanent companionship. The arrival of your first offspring brings the humbling realization that genetic contribution is very different from practical competence, and that producing a new animal is considerably easier than teaching that animal how to exist successfully in the world. Your offspring arrives like a small, loud reminder of your own early incompetence, but with the added pressure that this particular incompetent animal is somehow your responsibility to transform into a functional member of farm society. The basic mechanics of birth and early care proceed according to biological programming, but everything beyond that requires active decision-making about education, discipline, and development. The small creature possesses your general body structure, but none of your hard-won knowledge about how to use that body structure effectively. It approaches the world with the confident ignorance you remember from your own early days, requiring patient guidance about everything from basic locomotion to social etiquette. Teaching the basics proves more complex than anticipated, because basics that seem obvious to you require explicit instruction when transmitted to someone who has never encountered them before. How to stand without falling over. How to eat grass efficiently without getting dirt mixed in with the nutrition. How to look appropriately bored when humans approach with work intentions. The appropriately bored lesson proves particularly challenging because young animals tend toward either excessive enthusiasm or dramatic disinterest, both of which attract unwanted attention from humans who prefer animals that appear content but not demanding. The strange satisfaction of watching someone else figure things out slowly provides unexpected entertainment value. As you observe your offspring navigate the same challenges that once seemed impossibly difficult to you. Their mistakes are familiar, but their solutions are often different from yours, reminding you that competence can be achieved through multiple pathways. Watching them develop their own approaches to common problems offers perspective on your own development journey. The solutions that seemed like the only possible solutions turn out to be just the solutions you happen to discover. While equally effective alternatives exist for animals with different temperaments and preferences, the teaching process requires more patience than you expected, because young animals learn through repetition and experimentation, rather than through explanation and immediate implementation. They need to discover certain truths for themselves, while you provide guidance that keeps their experimentation within safe parameters. You've seen enough seasonal cycles to predict patterns with the accuracy of someone who has observed the same phenomena repeatedly under varying conditions. Spring arrives with predictable timing and recognizable signs. Summer heat follows familiar patterns of intensity and duration. Autumn transitions proceed according to schedules you can anticipate. Winter challenges appear on schedule and resolve according to established timelines. Pattern recognition extends beyond major seasonal changes to include subtle variations that affect daily comfort and planning. You know which winds bring rain within specific time frames, which cloud formations indicate weather changes, and which temperature patterns suggest optimal times for various activities. Your body learns to anticipate changes before they arrive, adjusting metabolism, coat thickness, and activity levels in preparation for seasonal transitions. This automatic preparation reduces the shock of environmental changes and allows you to maintain comfort and productivity throughout weather variations that once required difficult adjustments. The deep knowledge of where to stand for maximum comfort in any weather develops through years of testing different positions and observing their effectiveness under various conditions. You know which locations provide the best shelter during different types of storms, which spots offer optimal cooling during heat waves, and which areas maintain comfortable temperatures during cold periods. This knowledge extends beyond physical comfort to include social positioning, where to stand to observe important interactions without becoming involved in them, how to position yourself to be available for consultation without being intrusive, and where to locate yourself to maintain privacy when privacy is desired. The positional knowledge becomes intuitive rather than conscious, allowing you to move through daily routines with the efficiency of someone whose choices are informed by accumulated experience rather than active decision-making. The quiet pride of being exactly what everyone expects you to be represents a form of achievement that younger animals often undervalue because it lacks the drama of conquest or transformation. But being consistently reliable requires its own form of excellence. The discipline to maintain standards, even when maintaining them provides no immediate reward. Everyone expects you to be reasonable, and you are reasonable. They expect you to handle routine challenges competently, and you handle them competently. They expect you to provide guidance when guidance is needed, and you provide it. Meeting expectations consistently requires the kind of steady competence that's invisible when present, but obvious when absent. The pride is quiet because it doesn't require external recognition or dramatic validation. It's the internal satisfaction of knowing that you've achieved mastery in the areas that matter for your particular life circumstances, even though that mastery might seem unremarkable to observers who value more spectacular forms of achievement. Being exactly what everyone expects means you've successfully aligned your actual capabilities with the role you've chosen to inhabit, creating a harmony between internal reality and external perception that eliminates the stress of pretending to be something you're not or disappointing others by being less than they need. The accumulated wisdom of mature adulthood reveals itself to be exactly what the title suggests: accumulated mistakes with better marketing. The wisdom consists not of avoiding all errors, but of making errors that provide useful information about how to avoid similar errors in the future. Your mistakes have been numerous enough to provide comprehensive education about the consequences of various approaches to common problems, and varied enough to offer insight into the range of solutions available for different types of challenges. The marketing improvement involves framing these learning experiences as valuable education rather than embarrassing failures. The wisdom also includes understanding the limitations of wisdom itself. Experience provides excellent guidance for situations similar to those you've encountered before, but novel challenges still require experimentation, adaptation, and the willingness to make new mistakes in service of finding new solutions. Perhaps most importantly, wisdom includes recognizing that most of life's challenges are not actually novel, despite feeling unique when you're facing them. The specific details vary, but the underlying patterns repeat with enough consistency that accumulated experience provides genuine value for navigation and decision-making. As you settle into the comfortable rhythms of mature adulthood, watching younger animals make predictable mistakes while solving predictable problems, you realize that the boring life has achieved a kind of perfection that has nothing to do with excitement or achievement, and everything to do with the deep satisfaction of being exactly who you are, where you are, when you are. The quiet authority you've developed requires no enforcement, because it's based on demonstrated competence rather than claimed superiority. Other animals seek your advice because your advice has proven useful, not because you've insisted on being consulted. Humans include you in their decision-making process because your presence adds value to their thinking, not because you've demanded recognition. The authority is quiet because it operates through influence rather than control, suggestion rather than command, example rather than instruction. It's the kind of leadership that emerges naturally from consistent competence and continues naturally through continued reliability. Standing in your preferred corner of the pasture on a Tuesday afternoon that feels exactly like countless other Tuesday afternoons, watching Dolores graze nearby while your offspring practices the basic skills of existing in the world, you experience the profound ordinariness of a life well lived according to your own standards. The boring life continues to reveal new depths of satisfaction hidden within its familiar routines, proving that extraordinary lives are not necessarily better than ordinary lives, just different. And sometimes, different is less important than appropriate, dramatic is less valuable than reliable, and exciting is less satisfying than content. The wisdom you've accumulated, the relationships you've developed, the skills you've mastered, and the routines you've perfected combine to create a life that meets your needs, serves your community, and provides the kind of deep satisfaction that comes from being exactly what the world needs you to be. The mastery of seasonal rhythms extends into predicting not just weather patterns, but the behavioral cycles of every creature on the farm. You know when the chickens will become broody and disruptive, when the farm dog will have his seasonal bursts of inexplicable energy, and when humans will enter their periodic phases of reorganization that temporarily disrupt established routines before settling back into slightly modified versions of the original patterns. This predictability allows you to prepare mentally and practically for disruptions before they occur. When you notice the early signs of spring restlessness in the younger animals, you can position yourself to provide guidance during their inevitable periods of poor judgment. When you observe the subtle environmental cues that precede the human's annual efficiency improvements, you can adjust your own routines to minimize disruption while appearing cooperative with their initiatives. The deep seasonal knowledge also includes understanding which times of year are optimal for different types of learning and growth. Spring's energy makes it ideal for teaching young animals new skills, while winter's quieter pace provides better opportunities for reinforcing established routines and addressing behavioral refinements that require sustained attention. Your relationship with time itself has evolved from the simple present moment focus of youth to a more complex appreciation of how past, present, and future interconnect. You remember previous seasons not just as memories but as data points that inform current decisions. You plan for future seasons not with anxiety, but with the calm confidence of someone who has successfully navigated similar challenges before. The accumulated experience creates a kind of temporal wisdom where you understand not just what to do in various situations, but when to do it, how long it will take, and what the likely consequences will be both immediately and over time. This temporal perspective proves invaluable for managing not just your own life, but for advising other animals about the timing of their own decisions and activities. Your role as an informal mentor expands beyond teaching basic survival skills to include guidance about life strategy and long-term planning. Young animals seek advice not just about immediate problems, but about how to think about their futures, how to set realistic goals, and how to develop the patience necessary for achieving objectives that require sustained effort over time. The mentoring role brings with it the satisfaction of seeing your guidance translate into competent, content animals who develop their own approaches to the challenges you've helped them understand. Some follow your methods closely, while others adapt your advice to fit their own temperaments and circumstances. Both approaches validate your teaching, proving that wisdom can be transmitted even when it's modified in the process. You've learned to recognize which young animals will benefit from direct instruction and which learn better through observation and minimal intervention. The direct instruction approach works for animals who appreciate clear guidance and structured learning experiences. The observational approach suits animals who prefer to discover solutions independently while having reliable examples to reference when needed. The teaching experience also provides ongoing learning opportunities for you, as young animals often approach familiar problems from angles you haven't considered, revealing new solutions or highlighting assumptions you've made about the correct way to handle various situations. Your reputation for reasonable judgment leads to consultation requests that extend beyond animal-related issues, to include serving as a sounding board for human decision-making about farm management, equipment purchases, and seasonal planning. Humans talk through their options in your presence, using your calm attention as a way to organize their own thinking about complex choices. This advisory role develops because your presence provides a kind of emotional stability that helps humans think more clearly about problems that might otherwise be clouded by stress, urgency, or competing priorities. You don't provide answers exactly, but your steady attention creates space for better decision-making. The consultation process benefits you as well, providing insight into the human perspective on farm management and the complex considerations that influence decisions affecting your daily life. Understanding these considerations helps you anticipate changes, adapt to new requirements, and occasionally influence outcomes through strategic positioning and response timing. Your partnership with Dolores deepens into the kind of companionship that requires minimal maintenance while providing maximum comfort. You've learned to coordinate your individual routines in ways that create natural intersection points for shared activities without forcing togetherness during times when solitude serves both of you better. The relationship has evolved its own seasonal patterns, with periods of closer companionship during weather that encourages shared shelter and more independent activities during seasons that support individual pursuits. This flexibility prevents the relationship from becoming constraining while ensuring it remains a source of comfort and support. Watching Dolores navigate her own maturation process provides perspective on your own development journey. Her approaches to similar challenges often differ from yours, demonstrating that multiple pathways lead to competence and contentment. These differences enrich your understanding of what's possible, while validating your own choices. The comfortable coexistence includes shared responsibility for offspring guidance, with each of you contributing different strengths to the parenting process. Your systematic approach complements Dolores's more intuitive methods, creating a comprehensive educational environment that addresses both practical skills and emotional development. Your offspring's continued growth provides ongoing entertainment and occasional frustration as they develop their own personalities and approaches to farm life. Some of their choices align with your preferences and methods, while others represent completely different approaches to similar challenges. The parenting experience teaches you about the limits of influence and the importance of allowing young animals to make their own mistakes within reasonable safety parameters. Overprotection prevents learning, while underguidance leads to avoidable difficulties. Finding the balance requires constant adjustment based on individual temperament and demonstrated competence levels. Watching your offspring interact with other young animals reveals how your own teaching methods compare to those of other parents, providing feedback about the effectiveness of different approaches to common developmental challenges. Some methods that work well for your particular offspring prove less effective for animals with different temperaments, while techniques you've dismissed as inadequate work perfectly for other families. The community of farm animals has evolved during your tenure, from a collection of individuals sharing space to a genuine social ecosystem where everyone's behavior affects everyone else's comfort and productivity. Your role in maintaining this ecosystem involves not just direct intervention in conflicts, but also modeling the kind of reasonable behavior that encourages others to adopt similar approaches. The social ecosystem requires ongoing maintenance as new animals arrive. Established animals age and change, and environmental pressures create stress that can disrupt established relationships. Your contribution to this maintenance involves recognizing early warning signs of social disruption and taking appropriate action to address problems before they become serious conflicts. Your influence on farm culture operates through example rather than enforcement, demonstration rather than lecture, consistency rather than dramatic intervention. Young animals observe your approaches to common challenges and often adopt similar strategies, creating a kind of cultural transmission that extends your influence beyond direct teaching relationships. The accumulated authority you've developed feels both natural and slightly surreal, given that it arose from simply being consistently competent rather than actively seeking leadership roles. The authority exists because others recognize its value, not because you've claimed it or demanded recognition. As another season cycles through its familiar pattern of change and renewal, you stand in your established corner of the pasture, observing the complex rhythms of farm life with the deep satisfaction of someone who has found their proper place in the world and filled it with quiet excellence. The boring life has revealed itself to be neither boring nor simple, but rather a complex engagement with the ordinary challenges of existence that provides meaning through competence, purpose through contribution, and satisfaction through the simple act of being reliably, consistently yourself. Your quiet authority continues to operate through presence rather than power, influence rather than control, example rather than instruction. It's the kind of leadership that emerges naturally from demonstrated competence and continues naturally through sustained reliability. The wisdom you've accumulated through years of accumulated mistakes with better marketing serves not just your own decision-making but provides a resource for the entire farm community. The mistakes have been numerous enough to provide comprehensive education, varied enough to offer insight into different approaches, and recent enough to remain relevant to current challenges. As the afternoon light shifts with the changing seasons, and the familiar sounds of farm life create their eternal background rhythm, you stand in your claimed space with quiet authority, watching over your small domain with the patient competence of someone who has learned to find profound meaning in thoroughly ordinary excellence. The boring life, it turns out, is not an absence of significance, but a presence of deep, sustainable satisfaction that comes from mastering the art of existing exactly as you are, where you are, when you are completely ordinary and completely sufficient. Your morning routine takes a little longer now, not because you've forgotten how to do it efficiently, but because efficiency has revealed itself to be less important than joint comfort and the simple pleasure of moving at a pace that feels sustainable rather than optimal. The circuit that once took 17 minutes now requires 23, with additional pauses for careful consideration of terrain that used to be navigated automatically. The pauses aren't delays exactly, but opportunities for assessment that younger animals skip because they haven't yet learned that bodies require negotiation rather than command. Your knees have opinions about sudden direction changes. Your back prefers gradual transitions between standing and lying down. Your shoulders benefit from strategic stretching before committing to activities that involve carrying or pulling. These physical considerations don't feel like limitations so much as evolved wisdom about working with your equipment rather than against it. The younger animals watch your careful movements with a kind of polite curiosity, usually reserved for historical demonstrations, and you find their attention more amusing than insulting. The younger animals move with an energy you remember but no longer miss, like watching a sport you used to play with enthusiasm but now prefer to observe from comfortable seating. Their morning bursts of purposeless running, their dramatic responses to minor inconveniences, their tendency to treat every small challenge as if it requires immediate and vigorous solution. All of it feels familiar and exhausting in equal measure. You remember that energy, remember the feeling that every day required conquering, and every problem demanded aggressive intervention. The memory carries no nostalgia, because you also remember how exhausting it was to maintain that level of intensity, and how little of that energy actually translated into meaningful achievement. Your opinions carry more weight now, possibly because you express them less frequently, or possibly because the opinions you do express have been filtered through decades of experience that taught you the difference between thoughts worth sharing and thoughts better kept to yourself. The younger animals listen when you speak because speaking has become an event rather than a constant background activity. The gradual shift from participant to observer suits you perfectly, like transitioning from playing an instrument in the orchestra to conducting from a position where you can appreciate the whole performance. You still contribute when contribution is needed, but you no longer feel obligated to be involved in every activity or decision that occurs within your vicinity. Your offspring has produced offspring, creating a generation of small animals who are just as clueless as you expected, but whose cluelessness feels comfortingly familiar rather than frustrating. Watching them navigate the same basic challenges you remember from your own early days provides a kind of temporal entertainment, like watching a favorite movie where you know all the plot developments, but still enjoy seeing how they unfold. The younger ones approach you with respectful curiosity, as though you were a living landmark. They seek advice on problems that once seemed overwhelming to you, but which now feel manageable with the benefit of perspective. You remember the anxiety of facing such challenges, and you smile at how experience turns uncertainty into competence. You can guide them past the worst consequences, but you know mistakes are necessary teachers. Borrowed wisdom can soften the path, but it cannot replace the learning that comes from stumbling forward. Your reputation as the donkey who has seen it all makes you laugh, because it all has really been the repeating patterns of seasons, weather, social squabbles, and ordinary farm life. What once felt dramatic now reveals itself as variations on familiar themes. The pasture is layered with decades of small contentments. Afternoons in your corner, the water trough reflecting back not just your current self, but all the versions of you that have stood there before. These days, your routine includes pauses that feel natural, not necessary moments to notice how light shifts with the season, or how farm sounds weave into gentle patterns. The recognition comes quietly. Your boring life has been exactly right. Not adventurous by grand standards, but perfectly suited to your temperament and gifts. Excitement, you've learned, is mostly uncertainty in disguise, and competence strips away the need for such stress. Satisfaction comes not from drama, but from steady responsibility, relationships maintained, and a community supported without losing yourself in the process. The cycle of seasons feels like an old song, familiar yet subtly unique each time. Your role on the farm has become ordinary but essential, exactly what was needed, and exactly what you could provide. That ordinariness, sustained with care, has brought a deep and lasting fulfillment. As the end approaches, it feels less like a conclusion, and more like rest after a long, useful day. There is no anxiety about incompleteness. The life you've lived has been thoroughly lived. The morning light still glows on the grass, the young still repeat old mistakes, and the routines carry on. Your presence has become tradition, a rhythm that others have built around. That rhythm will outlast you, adjusted gently, as water shifts around a missing stone. Others will take your spot by the fence, and stories about the old donkey who knew things will be told, perhaps more flattering than true, yet grounded in the quiet reality of your competence. Your legacy is not grand achievement, but the steady contribution of order, reliability, and care. You showed that ordinary life, lived with attention, can be its own kind of art. The farm continues, seasons turning, the community adapting. The boring life was never boring at all. It was honest. And honesty, practiced with patience and care, becomes wisdom. Your masterpiece is complete, not because it ended, but because it was lived with a consistency that made the ordinary extraordinary.